birth marked by curiosity, 1809. On February 12, 1809, in Shrewsbury, England, a child was born into the wealthy and intellectual Darwin family. His name was Charles Robert Darwin. His father, Robert Darwin, was a respected physician, and his mother, Susanna Wedgwood, came from a family of successful industrialists. From the very beginning, Charles's world was filled with privilege, books, and gardens to explore. Yet, he was no ordinary child. He preferred collecting insects and shells over attending his lessons. Teachers often complained of his lack of discipline, but young Charles had a curious mind that thrived on nature. When his mother died suddenly in 1817, Charles was just 8 years old. The loss left him quiet and withdrawn, but also more drawn to nature, where he found comfort. By the time he entered Shrewsbury School, he had already developed a reputation for curiosity, collecting minerals and conducting little experiments. Although his father hoped Charles would follow in his footsteps as a doctor, the boy's fascination with the living world hinted at a very different destiny. The reluctant medical student, 1825 to 1827. At 16, Darwin left school and began apprenticing with his father in Shrewsbury, learning the basics of medicine. Soon, Robert sent him to the University of Edinburgh to study formally. But Charles was not made for the medical profession. The lectures were dull, the dissections horrific. He fainted at the sight of surgery performed without anesthesia, and his father worried about his future. Yet, Edinburgh became the first place where Charles's natural curiosity found home. He joined natural history societies, collected specimens, and learned from free-thinking professors. He became fascinated by marine biology, carefully studying sea creatures along the Scottish coast. For the first time, Charles glimpsed a world of scientific discovery outside medicine. Though he disappointed his father by abandoning medicine, Edinburgh planted seeds of a greater passion, to observe, to question, and to seek the hidden truths of nature. Cambridge and the Call of Nature, 1828 to 1831. In 1828, Charles was sent to Cambridge to study theology, preparing for a career as a clergyman. Ironically, this detour brought him closer to science than ever before. He spent more time collecting beetles than reading scripture. His enthusiasm for natural history was encouraged by mentors like John Stevens Henslow, a professor of botany who saw promise in Darwin. Henslow introduced him to leading naturalists, refined his observation skills, and gave him access to vast collections. Though Darwin's father worried that his son lacked ambition, Charles was quietly preparing for something remarkable. His passion for beetles became so intense that he wrote excitedly about new finds in letters home. In Cambridge's libraries and fields, Charles was unknowingly preparing for the voyage that would change both his life and the world. Then, in 1831, just after graduation, Henslow recommended him for a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to join the HMS Beagle as a naturalist on its journey around the globe. The voyage of the Beagle begins, 1831 to 1836. The HMS Beagle set sail on December 27, 1831. Charles Darwin, just 22 years old, was seasick for much of the voyage, but the journey opened the world to him in ways he could never have imagined. From the tropical forests of Brazil to the volcanic landscapes of the Galápagos Islands, Darwin saw nature in all its variety and wonder. He filled notebooks with observations, collected fossils, plants, and animal specimens, and began to question long-held beliefs about creation. The Galápagos finches, with their beaks perfectly adapted to different foods, particularly fascinated him. Could species change over time? Was nature constantly shaping and reshaping life? Though Darwin did not yet have the answers, the voyage was carving deep questions into his mind. By the time he returned to England in 1836, he was no longer just a curious young man. He was a scientist carrying the seeds of a revolutionary idea. Fame and Foundations, 1836 to 1839. Returning to England, Darwin found himself suddenly famous. His collections and notes impressed the scientific community, and his writings about the voyage brought him recognition. He began publishing accounts of his discoveries, and scientists marveled at his careful observations. Yet, Beneath his rising reputation, Darwin was troubled. He began to quietly explore the possibility that species were not fixed but evolved over time. This was a dangerous thought in a deeply religious society. At the same time, Darwin's personal life blossomed. In 1839, he married his cousin, Emma Wedgwood. Emma was intelligent, kind, and deeply religious. Their marriage brought stability, but also tension, for Charles's secret ideas about evolution conflicted with Emma's strong faith. Still, she supported his work, even as he retreated from society to study in private. Illness and isolation, 1840s. The 1840s were years of quiet struggle. Darwin suffered from mysterious illnesses, stomach pains, fatigue, and anxiety that plagued him for the rest of his life. Some believed it was from a tropical disease contracted on the Beagle. Others thought it was stress. Regardless, Darwin worked in isolation at Down House, his family's country home. There, he created a life of disciplined study. He tended gardens, raised pigeons, and experimented with plants, carefully recording every detail. Slowly, his theory of natural selection began to take shape. Yet, he hesitated to publish. The idea that humans shared ancestry with animals was shocking, even blasphemous to many. Darwin feared ridicule, and more painfully, he feared hurting Emma's faith. So he waited, building mountains of evidence in secret. A theory takes shape, 1850s. By the 1850s, Darwin's notebooks overflowed with evidence. Fossils, finches, barnacles, pigeons, all pointed to one conclusion. Species evolve through natural selection. He compared nature to a battlefield, where only the best adapted survive and pass on their traits. Yet, he remained silent, refining his arguments. Then came a shock. In 1858, Darwin received a letter from Alfred Russel Wallace, a young naturalist who had independently developed the same theory. Suddenly, Darwin faced a choice: stay silent and lose credit, or publish and risk controversy. With encouragement from friends like Charles Lyell, Darwin agreed to a joint presentation with Wallace. That same year, the scientific world first heard the radical theory of evolution. On the Origin of Species, 1859. In 1859, Darwin published his groundbreaking book on the origin of species. Written with clarity and patience, it laid out his theory of evolution by natural selection. The response was explosive. Some hailed it as a triumph of science, while others condemned it as an attack on faith. Newspapers, churches, and lecture halls buzzed with debate. Darwin himself avoided public confrontation, preferring the quiet of Down House. Yet his book changed science forever. It challenged humanity's understanding of its place in nature, suggesting that life was not fixed but ever-changing. For Darwin, it was the culmination of decades of thought, though he knew it was only the beginning of new questions. Fame, controversy, and criticism, 1860s. The 1860s brought both fame and fierce criticism. Darwin's name became a household word, debated in universities and pulpits alike. Supporters like Thomas Huxley, nicknamed Darwin's Bulldog, defended him passionately in public debates. Meanwhile, Darwin himself stayed largely in the background, writing more books and conducting further studies. He published works on orchids, climbing plants, and variation in animals. Though constantly ill, he pressed on, determined to provide overwhelming evidence. He became both admired and hated, but above all, impossible to ignore. Evolution had entered the world's imagination, and there was no going back. Later discoveries and reflections, 1870s. As the years passed, Darwin expanded his research. His book, The Descent of Man, 1871, boldly argued that humans, too, were part of evolution, a claim that sparked even greater controversy. He also studied emotions, earthworms, and plant movements, showing that his curiosity never faded. By now, Darwin was a global figure, respected even by many who disagreed with him. At Down House, he lived a quiet family life, surrounded by his children, gardens, and experiments. He remained gentle, humble, and reluctant to fight, even as his ideas shook the foundations of science and religion. The final years, 1870s, 1882. Darwin's health grew worse with age, but he continued to write until the very end. Surrounded by Emma and his children, he spent his last years reflecting on the journey that had begun with a seasick young man aboard the Beagle. Though he rarely sought attention, honors poured in from around the world. He had become one of the most influential thinkers in history, though he still worried about the impact his theories had on faith and morality. On April 19, 1882, Charles Darwin passed away peacefully at the age of 73. Legacy of a naturalist. Darwin was buried in Westminster Abbey, near Isaac Newton, a sign of his immense contribution to human knowledge. His theory of evolution by natural selection became the foundation of modern biology, influencing not only science, but philosophy, religion, and even politics. Today, his ideas continue to spark debates, inspire discoveries, and shape our understanding of life. Darwin's true gift was not just his theory, but his method: to observe carefully, to question deeply, and to seek truth with patience. From the child collecting beetles in Shrewsbury to the man who changed the world's view of life, Charles Darwin's journey remains one of the greatest stories in human history.